Hello everyone, a very good morning and welcome to Unacademy IAS English, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. So welcome to the daily Hindu analysis. Let's begin today's discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the daily edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 9 important articles. So let's cover them one by one as comprehensively as possible so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. If you guys are liking our initiative, do support us with your likes and comments, share this video with other aspirants, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Now, before we start the discussion, I have an important announcement for IAS aspirants. Unacademy will continue to provide the flat 60% off on our IAS courses, along with a 12-month free extension. Right now, our courses are available at one of the lowest prices at just 22,999. So to avail this offer, you just have to enter the code IAS English on the subscription page. So those interested can click on the link in the description box below and enter the code IAS English to avail this discount. Then please join my Telegram channel by scanning the QR code on your screen, because after the session ends, I'll be sharing the detailed PDF on my Telegram channel. So let's begin today's discussion by looking at this important column on page number 8. This article is related to the tariff wars that President Donald Trump has unleashed. I know we have discussed this topic many times in the last few days. We have covered this topic from all possible angles in different sessions. But however, I found this article to be very insightful, very interesting, because the writer takes a deep dive into the topic of tariffs. This article actually gives us an opportunity to understand this topic comprehensively. We can talk about America's trade policies, historically how US has championed free trade and globalization, how Donald Trump has disrupted this approach of the US. What is the logic, the rationale behind this decision of Donald Trump? There must be some explanation behind this large scale economic disruption that Trump's policies have been creating. So we can understand all these dynamics and we can talk about how the global trade can be disrupted. What would be the impact on US China economic relations? How would this affect India? And what should India do to deal with a destabilized world which is affected by tariff wars? It also leads us to the big question: will American policies, will Trump's tariff war push the global economy into a recession? Many top experts, economic analysts, and consulting firms, they are of the opinion, they have a concern that these policies of Trump and the trade war which has begun could not only push the American economy into a recession, it could end up pushing the global economy into a deeper recession. So, given the importance of the topic, let's dive into this article, go beyond the article as well to understand this topic in a very comprehensive manner. See, as I was mentioning, trade wars is not a feature of American trade policy and foreign policy, because United States has been the champion of free trade, at least in the last 70 to 80 years. Since the middle of the 20th century, especially following the Great Depression of the 1930s, during the Second World War days and the post war days, the US was the one which pioneered free trade. It called for the removal of trade restrictions, and it encouraged countries and even pushed countries to trade freely by eliminating the trade barriers. In that regard, US has been the champion of globalization and the primary architect of globalization. The US primarily benefited from free trade and globalization. In fact, US gave free trade the same priority as that of democracy. Just like US would support and push democracy around the world, it would similarly promote free trade as a economic ideology. So today it is quite alarming and shocking to see United States making a U-turn, and it's all thanks to the disruptive policies of President Trump. So what explains this? Now, before we talk about Trump's motivation and the rationale behind the tariff wars, let's see What kind of tariffs was US placing on the other countries before President Trump assumed office? See, over the last few decades, US has been levying one of the lowest tariffs on imports in the world. On an average, American tariffs on what it was importing into the country was just around 2 to 3%. Today, Donald Trump has levied 145% tariffs on China. I'm sure all of you are aware of this. Trump has levied a minimum 10% tariff on every trading partner. He has proposed to impose 20% tariffs on European Union, 26% tariffs on India, and similarly higher tariffs on Vietnam, Cambodia, Japan, and almost every major economy that has a trade relationship with the US. Trump labeled April 2nd as Liberation Day for United States as he unveiled this plan of a minimum 10% tariff with extremely high tariffs on the trading partners of US. But as of now, US has paused these tariffs for 90 days. After the stock markets tanked and the Wall Street and American tech companies exerted pressure on the US administration, eventually US has paused these tariffs on all the countries except for China. In fact, all the countries which were affected, they reached out to the US as well, opening up for dialogue and negotiations and considering a trade deal with the US. So, given these developments, the US has paused these tariffs for now, but the minimum 10% tariff has already become applicable. And China has been singled out because clearly China is the primary target of this trade war that has been launched by President Trump. So, China currently faces 145% tariffs. And China, of course, has retaliated, as we discussed in recent sessions, with almost matching tariffs against American imports into China. Now, look at the graph over here. As I was mentioning, historically, US has been a champion of free trade, globalization. It has historically levied very low tariffs on imports. On an average, just around 2 to 3% tariff was levied by the US. Now, if you compare that with, let's say, India, China, and other major economies, you will see the stark difference. From 1990s to early 2000, all the way up till 2024, American tariffs have historically remained low in the lower single digits when other countries would levy higher tariffs mainly to protect their domestic industry. So, what explains this U turn by the US? Why do you think Donald Trump is following such a disruptive policy? Just look at the chart that was unveiled by Donald Trump. So, the writer of the article compares this policy of Donald Trump to the equivalent of carpet bombing the global economy. That is the kind of disruption, the destructive impact of these tariffs. As many experts have opined, such tariff wars will be met with counter retaliatory tariffs by other countries. Because in the world of diplomacy, it's always give and take. What you give is what you get in return. So, such counter tariffs, reciprocal tariffs as they are called, would end up destroying the global economy. It would make trade unviable. It would essentially shut off the markets for imports and it could disrupt global supply chains. It could lead to shortage of essential items, leading to inflation and price rise of essential components and goods. It could have a unimaginable domino effect, which can't be controlled by any country alone. So that is why these tariff wars that Trump has unveiled, it has triggered fears of a recession. And many experts believe that definitely there is a possibility. If US, China, and others don't scale back, and if they don't bring normalcy back, and if the current instability and chaos continues, there is every possibility that it could further scare away the investors. It could lead to larger disruption of the supply chains and push the world into a much deeper and longer recession. So, given the scale of this impact, how it affects each and every one of us, it's important to understand on what logic, on what rationale did Trump decide to impose such tariffs. Given the scale of the disruption which is being caused, one would assume that there is a lot of thought which has gone into it. When such a big decision has been made, right? We would naturally assume that the most powerful country in the world, the most powerful government in the world, would have put a lot of thought behind such a decision. But it turns out that's not the case. I know you might be shocked, but there is very little logic and absolutely no rationale in the kind of tariffs that have been levied by the Trump administration. See, Trump has been under the assumption that trade deficit is a bad thing. Trump has always believed that a trade imbalance which goes against the US is in itself a bad thing for American economy. But that is not the case. That's not how the global economy works. In fact, the trade deficit was created by the US itself as a matter of deliberate policy. Because, see, manufacturing in the US at one point became very expensive and cost prohibitive. The labor cost had increased, material cost had gone up. There was no point in manufacturing in the US. So, that is one reason why the US pioneered globalization, especially from 1990s onwards, to basically outsource manufacturing and outsource key production outside of the US. It was primarily Asian economies which benefited from this, led by China from 1980s. China opened its doors to American investments, where American companies, manufacturing companies shifted out and set up factories in China in the special economic zones that China was establishing. And as China embraced this form of capitalism, despite being a communist country, it became the manufacturing powerhouse of the world. Eventually, other Asian economies from Vietnam to Cambodia to even India, and even the developed Asian economies, Japan and South Korea, Taiwan, etc., they all benefited from the American policy of pushing manufacturing out of the country. Because in the Asian economies and in these manufacturing led driven economies, the cost of labor was much cheaper relatively compared to the US. Material cost was lower. The workers possessed the skills that were required. So it was convenient for American businesses, for American manufacturers. And it was primarily for the sake of American consumers that manufacturing was pushed out of the US. The US realized it is cheaper to import than to produce the same good within the American economy. So that is what led to the shift of manufacturing towards Asia. But of course, the average Americans did lose their jobs. The middle class Americans, especially those working in factories, in steel factories, automobile factories, the farmers in the United States, their livelihoods were disrupted. Those especially working in manual labor, they did lose their jobs, creating resentment, creating a lot of resentment amongst the American middle class. But other than that, the US actually benefited from such a trade relationship. The US knew that it could control the prices, primarily because of the dominance of the US dollar in financial transactions. Given that the US dollar was the global reserve currency, and given the position of the dollar, right, US always enjoyed a competitive edge. It could basically procure cheaply produced goods at a very competitive cost. And in a way, US benefited from this and it could provide affordable goods and consumer goods and products to its consumers because manufacturing was being done outside of the country. So it's not that trade deficit happened on its own, or it's not that China and others deliberately manipulated the markets to hurt American interests. It was rather US itself which tried pushing out manufacturing in order to reduce the cost of production and thereby benefit from the cheaper labor and cheaper markets available in other countries. Now look at the table here. US runs a trade deficit against most of its trade partners. Now, naturally, one would assume that a trade deficit is bad, but that need not be the case. As long as certain interests are being met and a trade balance is maintained, trade deficit can be good as well. But of course, for US, it came at the cost of jobs. And that is the resentment on which Trump has built his political support base. Now, if you look at India US trade relationship, just look at this row over here. India exports close to $91 billion worth of goods as of 2022 to the United States. So clearly, US is one of our biggest export markets. And we import hardly around $47 billion worth of goods. So clearly, there's a big trade deficit. and India enjoys a surplus of $44 billion roughly. So US has a trade deficit against India. So Trump has often complained and even labeled India as a tariff abuser, as a tariff king. But tariffs by India, or let's say even by China or other countries, is intended to protect their domestic markets, as these are developing economies. Their industries, their farmers won't be able to compete with the global producers. And that's the reason why some of these countries do levy higher tariffs and try to block out American products. And more importantly, United States doesn't really have such major manufacturing as compared to the others. So a trade deficit per se need not be bad. So where does Trump get this logic or this explanation to justify these tariffs and the disruption of the global economy? If I tell you the reason behind it, many of you will be shocked and surprised. Trump's primary advisor on tariffs is a very controversial and disreputed economist, Peter Navarro. Harvard educated, but very controversial for his approach. And he is someone who has always been a China hater, essentially. He has written several books as well, calling for targeting China and blaming China essentially for America's economic problems. So, how did Trump hire a controversial economist as his primary advisor? There is a very interesting story behind this. During Trump's first presidency, Trump needed a good trade advisor. He asked Jared Kushner, his son in law, to look for a right candidate. And according to American media, according to verifiable reports, what Jared Kushner did was he searched on Amazon. He searched for books by economists. And he came across a book, Death by China. And who was the author of this book? Peter Navarro. Jared Kushner was impressed. He was impressed by the title of the book, not sure whether he read the book at all. And he was convinced that Peter Navarro could be the guy who could guide and advise the Trump administration on tariff policies. In the book Death by China, Peter Navarro makes a lot of references to some experts who are fictional, who don't even exist. Basically, Peter Navarro created fictional economists. In fact, one of the name cited in the book is actually an anagram of Peter Navarro himself. So such a fraudulent quack economist has been hired by Trump administration, and single-handedly he has been wrecking the global economy. Since he has the backing of the president, president's ears are open to Peter Navarro. He is an economist who has been discarded by the mainstream economists and experts. But such an individual has been hired to lead America's trade policy. It is his personal bias towards China, or rather against China, that is what drives his policy. And in a way, this is what Trump uses to justify the disruption that his policies have caused. That China is to be blamed for all the problems that America is facing. That China is to be blamed for the joblessness that Americans are suffering from. So it's hard to believe that the most powerful country would resort to such methods with no rational, no logic. So please understand, or rather Trump should understand this, that US actually has a lot of dependency on China, and it's mutual dependency. China also depends on the US. It's not that China has just ripped off the US. Even US has benefited from this relationship. As I said, it was US in the first place which pushed manufacturing out primarily towards China. US leveraged the cheaper labor and cheaper market costs in China to produce cheaper goods, and that is how American companies, all the tech giants, could produce cheaper products, which eventually benefited American consumers. It benefited the American economy. And you know what China is doing with all the trade surplus? Since China is the biggest exporter, which dominates global supply chains, you know what China is doing with all the trade surplus, with all the additional dollars it is accumulating? It is investing it back in US Treasury bonds. Today, China is the biggest accumulator of US dollar reserves, which in turn helps the American interests. It essentially helps maintain stability in the American economy. It allows US to maintain the dollar dominance in the international financial system. So both sides are mutually dependent here. US is indeed a big market for China. China is a key supplier for the US. China buys American treasury bonds, uses the dollar, and builds up a massive reserve, which in a way benefits both the sides. So now Trump is basically taking a hammer, trying to wreck this relationship in one blow. And that is why the large disruption which is being seen. Now, for any leader to take such decisions without even a proper logic or a sound rational, the leader must be very popular, must have a support base, or else any other leader by now would have been criticized, kicked out of office. So Trump gets the confidence to do this because his support base is essentially those workers, those middle class Americans who lost the jobs because of America pushing manufacturing out towards China and other countries. Primarily white middle aged men, those who worked in steel factories, automobile factories from Detroit to Philadelphia, the farmers in the rural hinterlands of United States. They are the ones who have blindly backed Donald Trump because they see Trump as a panacea for all their problems. They are indeed facing economic difficulties. They have lost livelihoods. They haven't focused on education. They are not able to land the right jobs. They don't have the right skills. See, Trump's logic is that by doing this, he can arm twist and force companies to invest back and rebuild manufacturing in the US to create jobs for Americans. The theory sounds good on paper, but it doesn't work like that. Even if, let's say, a company like Apple or Nvidia were to shift manufacturing back into US, let's assume for a second they can invest such a large amount of capital to create the manufacturing capacity. The point is, Americans don't have the education and skills to perform those jobs which Chinese workers, Indian workers, Vietnamese workers are doing. They don't have manual labor skills. Take example of textile sector. You think Americans can stitch garments, textiles, and make shoes like Vietnamese and Cambodians do or Bangladeshis do? They can't. They don't have those skills. They are not willing to put in that effort as well. More importantly, today's manufacturing is primarily robotic, especially in key industries like semiconductors, etc. Even by shifting manufacturing overnight, automatically jobs will not get created. So Trump misses this entire point because right now he's just focused on pleasing his vote bank, pleasing his support base. So political this political angle is indeed what plays a role behind Trump's illogical policy, which is wrecking the global economy. So, what will be the eventual impact of this? The price will be first paid by Americans themselves, especially by those who voted Trump to power. Why? Because if the tariffs continue, let's say US China trade war will not stop, the tariffs have taken effect, and essentially US China trade becomes unviable. It's impossible to trade with tariffs at 145%. So once China's supply stops, right, the trade collapses between the two, there will be a critical shortage of essential goods, components, and products. So American demand will remain the same. Americans want iPhones, they want the latest laptops, right? They want the best commodities. But with such high tariffs, nobody will import these goods, or even if it's imported, there will be a significant price rise, leading to inflation in the American economy, creating a shortage of high demand goods and products. As I said, manufacturing may not shift back to the US. It's almost impossible. See, right now, Trump has exempted key industries like semiconductors for now. Obviously, under pressure from companies like Apple and others, semiconductor industry has been exempted as of now. But these companies, they won't overnight shift manufacturing back to US. They won't be spending billions of dollars on this. They know it's unviable. They know Americans don't have the skills and education and the talent needed to pull it off. And more importantly, the labor cost, the material cost, the real estate cost as well. That matters to private businesses. So it's almost impossible that more jobs will be created in the US or manufacturing is going to shift overnight to the US. This is not going to happen. The only thing which will happen is it will disrupt the global economy. It will hurt everybody. So this is what Donald Trump has done within days of assuming office. But China is a very smart power. China actually is a few steps ahead. China anticipated many years ago that its dependency on American exports, exporting to the American market, could be a weakness. So, very smartly, China has diversified. China has reduced its overall dependency on exporting into the American market. Though China is one of the key exporters, top exporters into the US market, it's not entirely dependent on it. Even without exporting to the US, China can still be a major exporter because it has diversified. It has shifted manufacturing to other low cost countries like Vietnam. China has struck deals with Vietnam, Cambodia, and cleverly shifted manufacturing to these countries, which could also help evade tariffs. And Chinese companies can leverage the much lower cost of labor and materials in these countries, in Asian, Southeast Asian countries, to produce goods at a even cheaper rate. Because even China is not that cheap. It might be relatively cheaper compared to US, but let's say compared to India, China is still expensive in terms of labor and material cost. So China has smartly shifted manufacturing as well to other smaller countries where labor and materials are much cheaper. And it has diversified its export market through its Belt and Road Initiative. From South America to the Pacific, to Europe, to Africa, to South Asia, China has multiple other markets. And just look at the dependency of China on exports. If you take China's total exports as a percentage of its GDP, it has reduced it to just 19.7%. That's because China has consciously reduced its dependency on exporting to the American market. China has invested in science, technology, innovation. It's focusing on cutting edge technology. It's pioneering the fourth industrial revolution by focusing on AI, by focusing on electric vehicles. Today, it's the world's largest EV producer. It's pioneering AI advances. So, China can easily still dominate the world in the coming decades, even without having to depend on exporting into the American market. So that is what China has done. It has basically almost insulated itself by reducing its dependency on exports in general and especially exporting into the American market. So, where does this leave India? Is India prepared for the impact? What will be the eventual implications? As I said, Trump has labeled India as a tariff king, as a tariff abuser. But fortunately, India US, we do have good relations. And due to the very nature of the tariffs that have been levied, India can actually escape the actual impact of these tariffs. See, the US is indeed a critical market for us. As I told you, US is one of the top trading partners. China, US are the top two trading partners of India. And in 2022, we exported $91 billion worth of goods to the US, which clearly means US is critical for our exports, for our farmers, for our MSME sector, for our services industry as well. And what we earn from these exports, the trade surplus, that is critical for us to bridge the trade deficit, to cover the large import bill that we have. And compared to China, we have a slightly higher dependency on exports. I'll take you back to the same table which I showed you. Look at India's dependency on exports as a percentage of GDP. We have a 21.8% dependency when you compare our exports with regard to GDP. So it's slightly higher than China, but still it is manageable because there are countries which are almost entirely dependent on exports, like Vietnam. Vietnam has a 87% dependency on exports. Is that clear? So if Vietnam's exports crash, the economy itself will collapse. But that's not going to be the case with China and India because we don't have such a high dependency on exports. Of course, we will be hit. Of course, few sectors will take a direct impact. But still, India will be spared because parallelly, we are negotiating a trade deal. We are very confident and hopeful that in coming days, we will be able to finalize a deal with the US. And also, don't forget, Trump administration has spared critical sectors in India like pharmaceuticals and services. These are primary exports from India. The software sector has been exempted as it falls under services. The pharma industry has been exempted. So we won't bear the impact of tariffs in these critical sectors. So overall, the impact of American tariffs could be minimal on India. We might even escape the entire impact if we manage to strike a trade deal. But however, if the trade war and the chaos in the global economy leads to a global recession, then of course India also will not be spared. Right? India could be deeply hurt by the disruption in global supply chains. And any global recession will, of course, have a devastating impact on India's economy. So let's see, let's wait and watch what can happen. So finally, what can we do? What should India do going forward? Right? Because Trump will remain in power for a few more years. Or it could be some other country, some other leader who could do such a disruption. So how can India insulate from this? How can India ensure this doesn't happen again? All we can do is focus on domestic manufacturing. We need to scale our industrial policies. See, we have a dedicated scheme, the PLI scheme, production linked incentive scheme for few sectors, where we have tried boosting domestic manufacturing by incentivizing domestic manufacturing in the country. Though it has given phenomenal results, it's still not enough for us to compete with the likes of China and others. So, what we need is to scale up manufacturing on a larger scale, focus more on education, skilling, and training, make our workforce, our youth, job ready, focus on innovation, cutting edge innovation, focus on research, basic vocational training, so that at all the levels, India's workforce should be able to contribute, be it in AI or be it in garment manufacturing. Across the spectrum, our workforce should be capable of backing the ambition of India. So scaling our manufacturing capability, becoming more self-reliant, becoming Atmanirbhar, especially for critical supplies and critical imports, reducing our overall dependency on imports is what is needed. So, based on what we have discussed, please take up this practice question. Try to write an answer to this question and post your answers in the comment section. Now, let's look at another important article on page number 7, which is relevant for economy and even environment and ecology. This article is related to traditional seeds, traditional seeds, traditional crops, which are extremely crucial, not only for good nutrition, but also to withstand the impact of climate change, disasters, and global warming. Now, I'm sure all of you would have noticed when you go shopping in a supermarket or when you go out to a market to buy fruits, vegetables, or food grains. Do you think the same type of food is available in the market today as it was 20, 30 years ago? The answer is obviously no, right? I'm sure all of us would have had a personal experience with this. Let's say you take a fruit like banana, or a fruit like mango, or a fruit like watermelon, or any vegetable, a staple vegetable for that matter. The kind of fruit, vegetable, or food grain which we used to consume 20, 30 years ago, they are no longer available in the market. Maybe the older products, maybe they didn't have a good shelf life, maybe they didn't appear very attractive, maybe the taste was also slightly average, but nutritionally, they were very good. That's why I took the example of banana in particular. The native bananas which were grown in India, right? They were actually tastier than the ones which are currently available. Today, the Robusta variant, the Indonesian variant, which has flooded the Indian and global markets, they are absolutely tasteless. They might look very good. The size might be bigger. It appears as if it's a very good fruit, but eventually the taste, nutrition value has been compromised. And it's not just that. Our shift towards these newer hybrid variety of plants and crops, it has almost wiped out our traditional crops. And this is a big threat to our ecosystems. Because traditional crops were sustainable. Traditional seeds, which were conserved and protected at the community level, they were not only more tasty, more nutritious, they were good for the environment. They were drought resistant, they needed less water, they were good for sustainability. But today we have largely erased that. We have forgotten the gains of traditional seeds and crops and moved towards hybrid varieties, even though the world is at greater risk of disasters, droughts, forest fires, and floods. So, this is quite alarming. It's very sad and unfortunate with regard to what we have done with our food system itself. So, why is it happening? Let's understand this. Let's break it down. Again, if you've been to other countries as well, if you have seen supermarkets in other countries, or even in India for that matter, look at the drastic change that has happened in, let's say, a few decades with regard to the type and the color and the quality of food which was there and what is present now. Today, the food items might look more attractive. As I said, the fruits, vegetables, and all the food commodities, they might look better. They might appeal to us. Like the size might be bigger. The size of fruits, for example, from guava to apple, or the type of mango that you see, right? Or let's say even take rice, wheat, for example. Uh, there might be better tasting rice, a rice which is more fluffy, but is it really nutrient enough compared to the traditional varieties we had before? That is the big question. Now, why is this happening? Why is the food system changing so much? Why countries around the world are shifting towards the newer food items, which are more appealing and more attractive, even at the risk of compromising taste, nutrition, and more importantly, the environment and ecosystem? There are three reasons why this is happening. Please make a note, write this down. There can be a mains question, there can be an essay topic on this as well. The primary reason is the shift in consumer demand. See, farmers will obviously grow, the market will always cater to the demand which is present in the market. Correct? The producer of any good, of any item or commodity will try to produce what is required in the market. Now, you tell me, would you go buy a pale looking banana which doesn't have good shelf life, which doesn't appear to be good? Or would you go buy a bigger size banana which looks very attractive, which appears to have more shelf life? Naturally, you're attracted to the better looking products. But will it taste better? I don't think so. Is it nutritious? Most likely no. And is it good for our ecosystem? And definitely, the answer is definitely no. So this is compromising our genetic diversity. This shift in consumer demand is what is leading to the change in food production, in the food structure itself. Right? Farmers are growing what people want. People want bigger sized vegetables and fruits, the ones which look more attractive, the ones which appear to be more sweet. Let's say, for example, you take all the modern variety of fruits which have come up. They do have a sweeter taste or a different taste, but you have lost the essence. You've lost the innate taste that these products had many years ago, right? And nutrition has been compromised. Overall genetic diversity is getting compromised because of the change in cropping structure, cropping patterns. The shift towards hybrid seeds, hybrid farming on a commercial scale is destroying the native variety of crops and seeds. And this can be devastating because you can't recover from this. Once you lose the traditional variety of crops, it's almost impossible to gain back that genetic diversity. In fact, it should be a part of our rich cultural diversity and heritage as well. Because communities at the grassroots level, tribal communities in particular, rural communities, they have been dependent on traditional variety of crops. Today, we are breaking those links between our culture, between our traditional communities at the grassroots level and the food that they were consuming. The second reason why this is happening is the seed availability. Now, think you're a farmer, or let's say you know a farmer in your family or in your circle. Talk to them. They will tell you it's easier to buy a hybrid seed in the market than accessing a traditional seed variety. Now, you tell me which crop would you grow? It's like choosing an optional subject just because material resources are easily available, even though there are better optionals present for the UPSC exam. Don't you choose an optional because of the fact that there is easy material and resources available? That's what is happening with seeds. Given the commercial scale at which agro companies have promoted hybrid seeds, today it is easier, cheaper to get access to hybrid seeds than traditional seeds, because nobody is conserving traditional seeds. To conserve seeds, you need seed banks, especially at the local level, at the community level, which is led by the government. So we don't have enough efforts in this regard. Today, agro companies, the large agricultural giants, they've pushed their variants of crops. They almost have a monopoly on them. There are certain companies which own intellectual property over few seed varieties and plant varieties, from rice to potato. And they exploit this by making the seeds easily available. They flood the market and eventually they monopolize and they raise the prices as well. But farmers have no other choice but to buy the seeds which are easily available and use that for cultivation, because it's hard and difficult for them to find traditional seeds and varieties of crops. And the third big problem is the skewed government policies, which has ended up favoring high yield variety. See, you can't blame the government entirely here, but it was an inadvertent mistake. Post independence, India, a country like India, was facing severe food security challenges. We simply didn't have enough food to feed our people. So in 1960s, as India pioneered the green revolution, we focused on high yielding variety of crops, especially for essential food grains, wheat and rice. It was a necessary step at that point. But this policy of supporting and encouraging only few variety of crops, high yielding variety of crops, which provide higher productivity, it ended up destroying the biodiversity of the country. It destroyed the nutritional quality of food. It wiped out the traditional crops and traditional rice and wheat. So this has been the price that we have paid for the skewed agricultural policies of the government. Government has incentivized by giving MSP, minimum support price, for certain crops, focused more on productivity levels than on nutrition, than on conserving and protecting the traditional variety of crops. So this approach has reduced the funding for research and development as well. The agricultural or R&D institutions, even they focus more on hybrid seeds and hybrid crops. Their obsession is only with increasing productivity, not on conserving the traditional variants. But please understand why traditional variants are important. Traditional variety of seeds and crops are naturally climate resilient. They are less water intensive. They don't need excessive use of fertilizers, pesticides, and they're also drought resistant. They help in improving the fertility of the soil system. They are drought resistant, they are better at tackling floods. They can be more nutritious as well. For example, millets, they are less water intensive. So there are so many benefits attached with traditional crops. Correct? They need less inputs, less fertilizers, lesser pesticides, thus helping tackle pollution. It will reduce the input cost for our farmers, which could make agriculture profitable and a sustainable livelihood for our farmers. But what have we done? We have ignored all the advantages, benefits of traditional seeds and crops and moved towards hybrid seeds and crops. So, what can be done? What efforts are being undertaken and what measures can be put in place to reverse this trend? Conservation of traditional seeds is important. It's not that nobody is doing anything. There are many organizations, research organizations, NGOs, and even our own government has initiated many efforts in this regard. You might remember Prime Minister Modi's National Millet Mission, which was actually launched under the then Prime Minister Manmohan Singh. So, in the last 2 decades, India has actively pushed for adoption of millets to bring millets back onto our table, to change the choices being made in Indian kitchens, in Indian households. Eventually, it's the consumer who will determine what is grown. So, an attempt has been made to promote the nutritional value of millets, the advantages of millets. That's what traditional societies consumed. That's what ancient cultures consumed, not the fancy crops, fruits, and vegetables which are present today. So, such food is more nutritious, more sustainable, good for the environment, maintains the biodiversity, the genetic diversity. So, efforts are being made to revive that and conserve these seeds and crops. So, for example, what we need is local conservation efforts by establishing seed banks at the grassroots level. Because traditional communities, they still have that knowledge, the knowledge of traditional seeds and crops. So the government and R&D institutions, agricultural research institutions, NGOs, they have to work with the local communities, the traditional communities, and set up these seed banks funded through the government, which can conserve these variety of seeds. Then provide more funding for research on traditional crops and traditional seeds. Create the infrastructure for that. Create interlinkages between researchers and our traditional farmers who are still growing these traditional crops. Encourage them by giving them a support system, by giving them incentives. If we can provide MSP for higher production of food grains, then why can't we have an incentive, a subsidy kind of scheme to encourage farmers to grow a certain variety of traditional crops? We can push the usage of these food items, these crops, in our school meals, the midday meal program, or in the free ration that the government distributes to the people who are below the poverty line under various government schemes like Antyodaya Anna Yojana or the midday meal skill program. Such traditional food variants can be pushed, which is much more nutritious, and at the same time could be cheaper as well to produce. So this is what is necessary. The government needs to market and promote these traditional crop variants, right? It's very important to market them. And the government of India has done pretty well with regard to millets. The Modi government in 2023 proposed to the UN to declare the year as International Year of Millets. We internationalized the production and consumption of millets, and we have tried creating a brand value around millets. So such a push is necessary. This has to be taken forward so that consumers and their mindset can be changed. Today we are addicted to junk food, we are addicted to sweeter food. No wonder we like sweeter fruits and bigger looking fruits and vegetables. But we need to create better brand awareness that requires marketing, campaign, awareness generation so that we can push our consumers to change their choices. So that is what we learned from this important article. I feel it can be an essay topic as well, or at least you can plug this discussion into an essay which is related to environment and climate change, or an essay related to agriculture, right? You can try to plug in this argument as well. So please take up this practice question. Now, coming to the next article on page number 9, I'm sure all of you would have been taken up by this trend, the AI trend of generating Ghibli images, where you share your images of your friends, your family, and you try to convert it into Ghibli studio image. Even we tried out the trend, and you can see that on the screen. Now, let me discuss this topic because this is not just an internet trend. It was not just a fad. It has much bigger consequences. It has raised some very important issues which needs to be discussed, and UPSC will definitely find this topic to be interesting to be asked in the exam. The Ghibli trend, as I said, don't think it was just a online trend or a online phenomena which happened. There are deeper questions it is raising. So those who are not aware, let me tell you what is the Ghibli studio or Studio Ghibli, a Japan-based, Tokyo-based animation studio, which is world-renowned, worldwide. It's very popular. It was co-founded by this legendary filmmaker and animator, Hayao Miyazaki. I'm sure many anime fans out there would definitely be familiar with the popular works of Miyazaki. He's an Oscar-winning animator, by the way, and the studio he co-founded, Ghibli Studio, based out of Tokyo, it has a unique style of animation. They believe in traditional animation, meaning they don't really use computers, AI to generate animated visuals. They actually go with through the traditional method where they hand paint, hand animate, where they draw each and every frame, and they have a unique style which has become so adorable and popular around the world. The movies, the cartoons they have produced, the anime series they have produced are very, very popular. And one reason why they became popular was not just because of the style and the tone, which all of you are now familiar with because of the trend. They also became popular because of the ideology of Miyazaki. Miyazaki has been a strong pacifist given his upbringing in Japan, the only country which has seen the horrors of nuclear war, the only country which adopted a pacifist constitution. Miyazaki has always been an anti war hero. His every movie or animation, whatever he has produced through Studio Ghibli, has always promoted the theme of love, anti war, anti aggression. Be it war of any kind, conflict of any kind, militarization of any kind, violence of any kind, Studio Ghibli has taken a stand against it. That is the theme, the message that Studio Ghibli has always promoted. All right. And in fact, Miyazaki recently made a statement on AI generated art just a few months before this trend happened. He basically called out AI generated art as an insult to art itself. He said AI generated art is not true art because it's just a copy paste work where a machine, which is fed on data, which is trained on others' artwork, is simply reproducing a piece of art. And he said this is an insult to the field of art. Now, the question which comes up here is a ethical, moral, and legal question. First, let's talk about the ethical and moral aspect. So, as the Ghibli trend went viral, several governments, miscreants, and people who had a curiosity they started generating Ghibli studio images of every major event as well. And we saw that the Ghibli trend was now being used for military propaganda on one side, to even depict horrific terror attacks on the other side, just for the sake of views and fun and entertainment. You can see a Ghibli rendition of the 9/11 attacks. Here you can see the official account of IDF, Israeli Defense Forces, celebrating their military at a time when IDF is accused of committing a genocide and war crimes. Then you see a shocking image from the White House. This is the official account of the White House. A shocking image shared where it appears that American ICE and military officials are rounding up illegal migrants and depicting this in a comical situation, essentially making fun at the cost of the plight of the illegal migrants. And a shocker from India, the Babri Masjid demolition. The image was turned into a Ghibli style portrait, widely shared on the internet, which appears to celebrate the event, which in fact was a shameful event for the country that led to large scale communal riots. Of course, India has seen many such incidents, from anti Sikh riots to the Hindu Muslim riots that happened following Babri Masjid demolition. But turning such pictures into an act of celebration or using it for propaganda and essentially promoting militarization, promoting government propaganda, is essentially something that goes against the very ideology of Miyazaki and Ghibli Studio, what it stood for. Now, don't you think Miyazaki and Ghibli Studio own such certain copyright? Don't you think they have certain ownership over the artwork they have created? So, is it ethical to use their art and use it for militarization, military propaganda, government propaganda, or to make insensitive images and circulate them just so that it can go viral? That is a deeper ethical question which comes up here, right? Is it a case of copyright violation? Is it a case of ethical violation? What about the moral rights that the creators might have? What does this represent for artists in the coming days? Because clearly, OpenAI would have trained its ChatGPT algorithm based on the creative work of Ghibli Studio, right? Ghibli Studio artwork, which would be copyrighted artwork, would have been used in training the data sets that powers ChatGPT's algorithm. Now, OpenAI might profit from this. Microsoft, which has investments in OpenAI, might profit from this. It might come at the cost of the creative rights, the intellectual property of Ghibli Studio. So these critical questions come up. Isn't this a case of misappropriation of the creative expression of an artist? And that too, it's being depicted in a wrong way. An artist who stood against militarization, who was a pacifist himself, who stood against war of all kind, violence of all kind. Today, the same artwork, the style is being used to promote propaganda, militarization, and to even mock the victims of conflict. So, how appropriate is this? This raises the concern associated with AI. Then, coming to the legal standpoint, does this represent a copyright violation? Can Ghibli Studios sue OpenAI for intellectual property infringement? The answer is no. Technically speaking, legally speaking, this falls under the definition of fair use, which is defined in copyright laws. In the American context, if you look at America's copyright laws, fair usage of artwork is allowed. Fair usage of intellectual property is allowed. Because, see, you can claim ownership over a specific piece of art, but not over an idea. Now, for example, let's say I write a story or a poem or a song. If that is a very specific piece of art, or if I paint a picture, that is a specific piece of art, I can get that copyrighted. I can have intellectual property over that. But just a style or just an idea, you can't copyright that. It's like saying I invented idli, only I will make idli, or I invented paratas, only I'll make paratas. That doesn't work in the world of copyright, right? You can claim copyright intellectual ownership over a recipe or a painting or a movie or an artwork if it is very specific, only on that specific item, not on the entire idea. Like, for example, there could be intellectual property ownership for a specific movie which has been created by a team of producers and actors, etc. They can't claim ownership over the entire genre of that movie, right? They can't say that we own action movies or we own all types of satirical movies. That can't work. Ideas can't be copyrighted. The legal framework which exists doesn't recognize that. So experts are very clear that this does not represent a case of copyright infringement. The usage of Ghibli's style in the creation of these images which have gone viral through AI generated art, it does not represent a case of copyright infringement according to American law, because under American copyright laws, ideas can't be copyrighted. You can't claim ownership over a concept, over an idea. You can only have ownership and intellectual property over a specific creation, over a specific art. But what about the moral rights? Doesn't Miyazaki and Ghibli studio have the moral rights? This is where there is a legal gray area which has not been settled yet. Especially AI and the emergence of generative AI has raised a critical technology law question. A very important technology law question has been raised, which has not been answered, and only courts or laws which are passed can provide the answers here. So, this is where we need to understand the need for regulation of AI. Laws need to define the extent to which AI can make use of artwork and intellectual property to train their data models. It needs to be clearly defined what constitutes a copyright infringement, or else tomorrow creators will vanish. AI can destroy artists, creators, even educators. You will be driven out of your careers if AI continues on this path. It's a very dangerous future that you might be looking at. So, to avoid that possibility, what you need is clear definition, a legal definition. Even in the US, the courts have not interpreted in this matter with regard to this gray area that exists, right? There's no interpretation as of now. So, there is a need for legal clarity here. How do you define these moral rights? How do you address the ethical dilemmas? How do you protect the viability of an artist's career? Because AI can easily append and destroy the careers of artists, from musicians to songwriters to story writers to painters. Their careers can be completely destroyed because AI can easily learn the style and even reproduce or generate new work using the exact same style and the influences. So, to protect the right of creative expression, to protect intellectual property, and also to address the larger ethical moral concerns, there is a need to further regulate AI. Right now, websites and artists are using certain methods. What they do is websites add an extension called robots exclusion protocol on the platform. Once a AI tool detects a robot exclusion protocol on the website, it does not harvest that data for training the algorithm. This is right now followed by OpenAI and most of the genuine AI platforms, because the copyright owners or those who don't want their content to be used, their data to be used for training AI models, they can place a limit on content scraping. Let's say you have a website, okay, you're posting your content, your creativity over there. Now you don't want OpenAI and other AI tools to learn from that, to copy from that. So if you include a robot exclusion protocol on your website, AI tools will recognize that. They will respect the limits you have set and they will not scrape the content from your website. So this is one way forward. And also, other than this, artists can consider using paywalls, like how newspapers are doing. You have to pay, right? You create a paywall where the consumer, the viewer has to pay for viewing the artwork, for accessing the content that one has created. You basically place a paywall and thus make it inaccessible for AI training models. And the other way forward is for governments to come out with social labor policies to protect artists, to protect those who might be threatened by generative AI in the future, right? Because this is not something which is the stuff of science fiction or which might happen 100 years down the line. This is something that is already happening in front of us. You are seeing careers being destroyed in front of you. So there is a need to come out with social labor policies where the government can try to protect the viability of certain careers which could be threatened by AI. Next, on the front page, we have an article related to a development in Kerala. I just want to shed some light on it, and then we can move towards the prelim section. In this historic temple in Kerala, the Pilikode Raya Ramangalam temple in Kasargod. Finally, the caste barrier has been lifted. Can you believe, even in today's times, a caste barrier existed at this temple in Kerala? When it comes to the inner sanctorum, what you call as the Garbhagudi or the Nalam Balam, only those from the upper caste, the elite caste, were allowed into the inner space of this temple. So basically, Brahmins, those who are from the Marar and warrior castes, only they would be allowed inside the inner space, the inner quarter of the temple. Other lower castes have been kept outside of it. Only during special occasions like festivals, for example, other castes such as the Nayars and others had been allowed, but lower castes had been definitely kept out from this temple. So this represented a social evil, essentially. And right now, a reformist movement in Kasargod exerted pressure on the temple management committee and the local community. Finally, they've decided to open up the inner space to allow members of all castes, irrespective of one's caste, to enter the inner sacred space of the temple. So, this issue of temple entry and how untouchability, caste based discrimination has led to the perpetuation of the distinction in the society. This actually reminds us of one such temple entry movement during our freedom struggle. The temple entry movement, also known as the Vaikom Satyagraha, led by the legendary Periyar, which was backed by Mahatma Gandhi, later by Dr. Ambedkar. By the way, today we mark the birth anniversary of Dr. Ambedkar. So in 1924, the Ezavas, Pulayas who were denied entry into the temples in Travancore, they got the support of E.V. Ramaswamy Naikar, also popularly known as Periyar, who led the Vaikom movement, which would get the support of our freedom fighters as well. From T.K. Madhavan to Mahatma Gandhi himself would back the Vaikom struggle. And eventually, by 1930s, it led to social reforms in Kerala, where temple entry was finally allowed for people of other castes and lower castes as well. But still, such practices continue in some places. And to see that reform happening, it's indeed a matter of great pleasure, right? So now let's quickly move towards the prelim section and wrap up today's discussion. On page 4, we have a very interesting article related to Bodh Gaya. This can be important for history as well, for optional and even for your mains exam, not only for prelims. So let's see what is the news about Bodh Gaya. As you all know, Bodh Gaya is a sacred place in Bihar, the site of the Mahabodhi temple, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Correct? It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. In Buddhism, it is believed that this is where Siddhartha Gautama attained full enlightenment, attained Samma Sambodhi to become the Buddha. So it has been a revered pilgrimage, a shrine for Buddhism, for Buddhists all around the world, not just in India. Bodh Gaya attracts pilgrims, tourists from Japan to China to Southeast Asian countries. But there is a controversy brewing at the heart of Bodh Gaya, at the temple site itself, at the Mahabodhi temple, with regard to the management of this temple. So, what happens with regard to the management of Bodh Gaya is that there is a law which defines the management of the Bodh Gaya temple. This law, passed by the Bihar government post independence, it provides for a management committee. The Bodh Gaya Temple Management Committee, BTMC, is set up. This temple management committee consists of 4 Buddhists, 4 Hindus, and the chairperson is the DM of Gaya district, who's obviously an IAS officer. Until 2012, there was another controversial provision under this law. See, it's not only jointly managed by a group of Buddhists and Hindus under the chairmanship of the DM of Gaya. Generally, you would think Bodh Gaya is a Buddhist site. So, what are Hindus doing in the management committee? Why are Hindus represented here? I'll come to that point. The DM of Gaya acts as the chairperson of this committee. But before 2012, before a new amendment had been introduced, there was a very controversial provision in this law. That old provision which was there, it stated that if the DM, if the chairperson is a non Hindu, then in that case, right, in that case, meaning if the DM is, let's say, a Buddhist or a Christian or a Muslim, then automatically one of the Hindu members would be appointed as the chairperson of that committee. So this has been opposed from a long time by the Buddhist monks. It has even led to a tussle between the Hindu priests and the Buddhist monks. So right now there is a demand by the Buddhist monks to remove this outdated law because they want a Buddhist site to be managed only by Buddhists. They don't want Hindus to be present in this committee. They don't want the DM to interfere. Similarly, Hindus on the other side are against it. Now, why is it relevant for Hindus? Why are Hindus present in this management committee? There's a history behind this as well. See, when Bakhtiyar Khilji in 13th century, the Turkish Afghan ruler, right, who led a conquest across northern India, when he ravaged northern parts of India all the way till Bengal and Bihar, many Hindu temples were destroyed by Bakhtiyar Khilji. Following this, some of the Hindu leaders, they set up a mutt, Bodh Gaya mutt, a monastery essentially was set up for the Shaivite community at Bodh Gaya. These Shaivites, since all the other Hindu temples had been destroyed by Bakhtiyar Khilji, they started believing that Gautam Buddha is the reincarnation of Lord Vishnu, turning Buddha into a sort of a Hindu deity or a Hindu figure. So there has been that tussle between Buddhism and Hinduism. That's why Hindu pilgrims also visit Bodh Gaya, which is often not liked by the Buddhist monks. And the management of the committee, jointly by Buddhists and Hindus, has been a matter of contention. So there is a demand to repel this act. This discussion, this debate has come up and propped up again following the controversy over the Waqf Amendment Bill, where the government has proposed to introduce non Muslims into the boards that manage mosques and Waqf property in the country. So it's in this context that the management of Bodh Gaya, the controversy around it, is in the news. Understood? And also, the Beam Army, Dalit organizations are backing the Buddhist monks, given the fact that Dr. Ambedkar converted to Buddhism to escape the caste oppression present in Hindu society. So they are backing the Buddhist monks as well. But there are other critics, experts who are pointing out that this has nothing to do with religion or history. Just both the sides are exploiting it because the temple manages very large funds. So those members who are part of the committee, they just want to have a share of these funds on both the sides. So it's a very controversial issue, but definitely it's something you need to take note of. Next, on page 12, there is a new military exercise in the news, which I think can be very important for the upcoming prelims. India has launched the first edition of the AIKEYME exercise. AIKEYME exercise stands for Africa India Key Maritime Engagement. Please write this down, very, very important for your prelims. It's a multilateral exercise between India and few African countries launched by the Indian Navy. The first edition is being held off the coast of Tanzania, which is an East African country. It's being held off the coast of Dar es Salaam, which is a major city in Tanzania, coastal city in Tanzania. So off the coast of Tanzania in East Africa, in the western part of Indian Ocean, this multilateral naval exercise is being held. It's an Indian initiative and it aligns with the Mahasagar vision that PM Modi has recently announced. Mahasagar is an upgradation of the Sagar doctrine. The Sagar doctrine, which was launched in 2015, defined India's approach towards the Indian Ocean. It stood for security and growth for all in the region. So recently, when PM Modi visited Mauritius, he announced the upgradation of Sagar into Mahasagar, which stands for mutual and holistic advancement for security and growth across regions. So, under the vision of Mahasagar, India is aligning with African countries, especially in Eastern and Southern Africa, and holding this multilateral naval exercise called AIKEYME. Many countries are participating, apart from India and Tanzania, which are the co hosts. Countries such as Comoros, Djibouti, where China has a naval base, Kenya, Madagascar, Mauritius, Mozambique, Seychelles, and South Africa. These are the participants in this naval exercise. So please make a note of this. Remember the name of the exercise, the vision and the idea behind it, and the participating countries. Next, the DRDO has tested a laser based directed energy weapon system. See, directed energy weapons, or DEW, DEW. It's one of the most advanced forms of weaponry which is being pursued by all the major powers around the world. Very few countries have been able to pioneer directed energy weapon systems. Countries like US, China, Israel, to an extent Russia, France, they are the only ones who are working in this domain, and US, China have already managed to put in place deployable laser based directed energy weapon systems. So India has taken a big stride in this regard when DRDO successfully tested this weapon platform at the National Open Air Range in Kurnool district in Andhra Pradesh. A laser based directed energy weapon basically uses a high energy beam which travels at the speed of light to physically break up a target, or physically burn down and cut down a target and destroy the electronics present in an approaching target. Let's say there is an enemy drone or a enemy aircraft which has breached our airspace, or let's say there is an enemy target, a flying target which has to be destroyed. A directed energy weapon basically cuts through by using its high energy. These are high energy beams, electromagnetic beams. So these laser based weapons are very, very cheap and effective, right? They can burn up the electronic systems, burn up the circuits, leading to the collapse of the approaching target, or it could essentially cut down the target physically as well. So it travels at the speed of light. It's very effective, very efficient once you master the technology, and it's very, very cheap. Firing one beam of laser is as cheap as maybe a couple of liters of petrol. So instead of spending millions of dollars on missiles, this is a much more cost effective, cheaper option. And that's the reason why countries are running a race, an arms race, to develop directed energy weapon systems. Very few countries are working in the domain, and India is one of them. And DRDO has managed to conduct a test. Next, I just have a couple of updates for you. Um, Something you need to know, not very important for the exam, but something you should be aware of. Ukraine has made a very controversial allegation. See, Russia carried out a major strike, airstrike and drone strike in Ukraine, and a pharmaceutical warehouse in Kiev was hit. Ukraine has claimed Russia has deliberately hit a Indian pharma warehouse company. The warehouse which was destroyed in this missile attack in the Sumy region of Ukraine belongs to an Indian pharma company called Kusum Healthcare, which has a major production in Ukraine, and it's a key supplier in the Ukraine health and medical industry. So the warehouse of this Indian pharma company has been hit, but there is no reason to indicate that Russia would deliberately target an Indian facility, a facility owned by an Indian company. It appears that Ukraine is trying to sow discord between India and Russia as we mark the 78th anniversary of India-Russia relations. It's not that this will disrupt India-Russia relations. We have a much stronger relationship than that. But it shows that Ukraine might be making such an attempt. Ukrainian embassy issued this statement. Uh, it's clearly an attempt to misdirect and initiate a discord between India and Russia. It's highly unlikely that Russia would have deliberately targeted a facility owned by an Indian company. Next, US National Security Advisor Michael Waltz, who was supposed to visit India on a high profile visit, has cancelled his visit at the last minute because of a major controversy which has broken out in the US. The Signal Gate controversy. You might have heard that Michael Waltz, the NSA, right, he committed a huge blunder, operational breach, when US was making plans to launch military strikes against the Houthis in Yemen. He created a chat group on Signal app, adding the vice president and other senior officials. And he mistakenly added a journalist as well, as these officials publicly, openly discussed military plans, real time military plans. So, this is a major breach because such classified communication cannot be carried out through commercial apps like Signal. Reports are indicating that Michael Waltz has a habit of making such groups. It's like making a WhatsApp group. Imagine Prime Minister Modi and top officials making a WhatsApp group to discuss key operational details of a military operation. That's exactly what the US NSA had done. And most likely he might get fired. So that is the controversy, right? So this controversy, which has brought him under pressure, has led to the cancellation of this visit. But this could have an impact, a slight impact on India US defense relations. Why? Because India US recently announced an initiative called the Trust Initiative. When PM Modi visited United States and met with Donald Trump, India US announced the Trust Initiative, transforming relations utilizing strategic technologies mechanism. So, trust is an acronym. It expands and stands for transforming relations utilizing strategic technologies. This has replaced the ICET initiative on critical emerging technologies, which was set up under the Biden administration. So both the initiatives are exactly the same, known by different names. But this initiative, which is now called Trust, which was previously called ICET, focuses on critical emerging technologies, be it AI, quantum computing, even satellite space technology and semiconductors, etc. These critical emerging technologies, from robotics to advanced communication, right? 5G, 6G networks, open RAN communication technology. This is the priority of the ICET initiative, and it's the same for Trust Initiative now. Along with that, they've also focused on critical minerals now under the Trust mechanism, establishing supply chains of critical minerals, securing critical supplies of key raw materials. This has also been added as a mandate of the Trust Initiative. So this brings the research institutions of India, US together, the government institutions, even the private sector, the startups together to focus on these key technologies. So under ICET, we had an initiative called INDUS-X, specifically meant for creating a defense startup ecosystem and to collaborate between the research institutions of India and US in the defense domain, to bring public sector, private sector startups, and other defense research organizations together to accelerate defense research and collaboration. So INDUS-X continues under trust mechanism. INDUS-X initiative continues under the trust mechanism, though it has been replaced and upgraded from ICET. So that is what you learn from this important article. And on this note, I would like to bring my discussion to an end. I hope you guys have found the session to be useful and interesting. If you did, let me know in the comments. That is it for today. Thanks for watching. Do press the like button and don't forget to share this video with others and do hit the subscribe button. So let's see you tomorrow. Till then, take care. Have a good day.